Welcome to Decades of Heistery, where we cover safecrackers and bank heists from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. On the sleepy streets of Plantsville, Connecticut, 4 men, 3 named and one something of a ghost, pulled a short-lived robbery possibly connected to Cicero, Illinois, and therefore Chicago's Gangland. In Wisconsin, a dying man was finally captured for his role in a huge 1924 Wisconsin bank heist. 2 major crimes, 4 captured crooks, and 1 shadow on the lam. That comprises June 1927's main stories. First to the Midwest, in the South Bend News-Times, dated June 11, 1927. Titled, "Ohio Authorities Hold Bank Robbery Suspect," this international news service story was about one Chester Barker, a 41-year-old, who was being held in Wauseon, Ohio, for Milwaukee authorities. He'd been arrested near Delta, Ohio, and was at that point alleged to have participated in the December 8, 1924 robbery of the Northwestern National Bank. We covered that story way back in the July 1926 episode 2 titled New York City Gang Friendly Fire, Oakland, California Narcotics Addicts in Ohio Bank Heist Combine Shut Down. The Milwaukee Leader's June 14th story had this amazing photo of James Barker. So he's probably James Chester Barker, would be my guess. Well, he'd been identified as a man who covered, meaning held a gun on someone else, while a bandit gang held up that Northwestern National Bank for $280,000. The story was titled, "Bank Officials Named Suspect as Bandit Aide." Quote, "That's the man who stuck the gun in my face while I was counting money," said Lars L. Nahl, bank teller. And it wasn't just Nahl who identified him. Others did as well, including Henry A. Digman, who was a vice president of the bank, and Marion Landish, who was a bookkeeper. The next day's Milwaukee Leader ran a story, "Carey will assist Rubin in defense of bandit suspect." A.M. Carey was a Minneapolis criminal lawyer, and he planned on joining up with attorney William B. Rubin. Carey, incidentally, had defended John B. Davenport when Davenport was acquitted of being involved in the same robbery. So you're saying there's a chance? Well, not so much. The Milwaukee Leader's June 18, 1927 story essentially dashed the idea that there was a chance. Titled, "Gets Sentence of 3 to 7 years," we find out that indeed James Barker had been sentenced after he confessed to participating. He pleaded guilty, was sentenced by Judge George A. Shaughnessy, and was taken back to Waupun to begin that sentence. Well, a story followed and added some important details. Titled, "Admits Aid in $280,000 Holdup Here," was subtitled, "Confession Followed by Plea of Guilty." Barker was identified by Erwin Ballman, who told of how Barker had pushed a revolver past his face and, quote, "covered the teller as Ballman was making a deposit," end quote. Somehow Barker's great team of counselors had vaporized as he turned up to be no longer defended by anyone. Importantly, doctors testified that Barker was in very poor health and could not be expected to live long. Barker had been arrested in Wauseon, Ohio. Why there? It was his brother's home. So was he going somewhere familiar to hide out? Or was he going there because he knew his life was coming to an end? Well, interestingly, the, quote, "only other member of the bandit gang convicted of the robbery," end quote, who was currently at the time serving a sentence in Waupun, was poker player Matty McNeil, who we covered in the August 1926 episode titled Poker Star McNeil sentenced, Crybaby sent to Sing Sing, and a robber calls police for help. I've learned to make my titles much shorter since. Well, it seems that the core of the gang used patsies or fall guys in Matty McNeil and James Chester Barker, so they would end up taking the fall. Well, the Evening Star of Washington, D.C. ran a June 18, 1927 story that tied everything together with admits $280,000 holdup, suspect held in Ohio confesses Milwaukee bank robbery. The only addition to our story is that this gang that hit Northwestern National Bank was comprised of 7 men, a core of 5 robbers, and that McNeil and Barker were more peripheral patsies or aides. Off to the Nutmeg State and the Evening Star's June 23rd edition, 3 are now detained in Connecticut holdup. It's subtitled Florahan, alleged mastermind, arrested for $4,400 Southington Bank robbery. The AP story noted that Stuart Florahan, 24, was in fact a resident of Southington, Connecticut, that he'd been arrested and charged as being the instigator of the bank that was robbed Wednesday, June 22nd for $4,400. Florian's background included him having been arrested at 14 for holding up a baker, and a year or so ago, he'd been charged with evading responsibility after an accident, so like a hit and run, soon after which he left the area and spent most of his time, quote, in the West and the South, end quote. Arthur Mayer, 24, of Cicero, Illinois, was arrested on the evening of the heist at Florian's home. Meyer confessed that he'd participated in the bank job and admitted that Florian was the mastermind. When arrested, Meyer had about $75 on him, but told police where he'd buried $700 more in the woods, somewhere in the area of Bristol, Connecticut. This version of the arrest of Meyer is detailed and differs pretty dramatically from that of the Evening Star's rendition. His arrest came about due to, quote, quick thinking on the part of Edward England and Timothy O'Connor, 2 Southington youths, end quote. These youths had been spending the evening at the lake compounds, and were leaving the parking lot when a stranger asked them for a ride. They asked the stranger where he was going, and in return they received the cryptic quip, quote, anywhere, end quote. They told him to get in, and they drove away. But then they stopped when they got to Forestville, and one of them got out of the car. The young man then went up to a night patrolman named Victor Shabbat and told him of their suspicions. The officer questioned Meyer, who answered unsatisfactorily, so he was taken to Bristol Police Department headquarters. Well, Meyer was taken before Police Chief Ernest T. Belden, who noticed Meyer's hands shaking. Well, Chief Belden then reached over and opened the man's coat and noticed a Cicero, Illinois clothier label on the inside pocket. Meyer was grilled and eventually confessed that he'd operated the car while the other 2 went inside the bank. Meyer then implicated Florian, who was arrested by state police around 2:30 in the morning at his house. So it was Florian who was arrested at Florian's house, not Meyer. Makes sense. Well, Florian, he'd gone to Cicero, Illinois to discuss holding up the bank with Meyer, and Meyer arrived from Cicero in Southington, Connecticut 2 weeks or so previous to the holdup. Also arrested was a Thomas DeMarco. When caught, DeMarco was attired in a soft straw hat and was carrying a light coat and a small black case. Well, here comes a car containing Ralph Thompson, who was son of Constable G.R. Thompson, and Arthur Lindstrom, who was alleged to be a well-known baseball pitcher. And they ease their way down a little-used lane. As Thompson and Lindstrom approached an old wooden bridge, they sighted a man carrying a light coat and a black handbag. The man looked up and noticed them and darted off the trail into the woods. While Thompson took off on foot, Lindstrom turned the car around and headed around this patch of woods to the other side. Well, again, DeMarco emerged from the woods and was quickly covered. And that's when he explained that a man had given him the satchel and asked him to carry it to lake compounds. DeMarco said that it only had clothes in it, but he was ordered to open it, and voila, it had gold, silver, and bills. At that point, DeMarco was handcuffed and taken to Bristol Police Department, where he was questioned and held overnight. He was charged with, quote, being one of the two armed men who this afternoon robbed the Plantsville National Bank of $2,000, end quote. DeMarco at the time was around 32 and Meyer about 28. The more accurate and local paper, the Springfield Weekly Republican, out of Springfield, Massachusetts, ran fugitive charged with taking part in bank robbery and subtitled it Man Captured with Money in Grip Held in Connection with Holdup of Southington Institution. Just substitute the word suitcase for grip and then it would make sense. When captured, police found $625 in gold, $835 in paper currency, and $46.75 in an other unknown form, quote, which DeMarco was carrying in a grip, end quote. Well, we learned that Thomas DeMarco was actually Thomas DeMarco, which seems way more likely, especially since he, as well as Meyer, hailed from Cicero, Illinois. So who is this DeMarco? Apparently he was 5'6" and 137 pounds. He had dark eyes and curly black hair, smooth shaven, and, oh yeah, the first two fingers on his right hand were severed at the second joint. Also somewhat fishy was that he had, quote, a peculiar twist to his mouth and a sallow complexion, end quote. They didn't go as far to say that he was swarthy and appeared to be one of them there Italians, but they were close. DeMarco was taken to Bristol Police Headquarters and was, quote, grilled by members of the state police, end quote, also by Bristol Police and Attorney Mather. DeMarco's excuse for the grip containing all that loot was that a stranger had handed him the case and asked him if he'd hold it for a few minutes. And then DeMarco refused to answer any other questions as he awaited his lawyer. So here's how the heist went down. Raymond G. Olson, who was a cashier at the Plantsville Bank, was forced by men at point of gun to open the door of the safe. He said he was in the bank with his wife, who was also a bookkeeper, was there helping her husband out. Mr. Olson was in the teller's cage. As Mr. Olson was busying himself with some task, a man approached the window and asked him to change a $10 bill. As Mr. Olson looked up, he faced a .32 caliber automatic pistol. The robber ordered Mr. Olson to throw up his hands, and indeed he did. The bandit moved around to the outside of the cage and kicked the door in and ordered Mr. Olson to lie face down on the floor. Mrs. Olson was ordered to stand with her face to the wall and her hands in the air. She was warned that if she moved or screamed, she would be killed. Now, there were two .45 Colt automatic revolvers, if there is such a thing as an automatic revolver, in the cages, but neither Olson was able or eager to go for one. So the bandits packed all the currency, gold and silver, in a white sack and departed. Now, a Theodore T. Weiss was about to enter the bank to make a deposit. Mr. Olson shouted an alarm to Weiss, who in turn shouted out to the whole neighborhood, and the chase was quickly on. Now, police believe it was actually Meyer, not Florian, who was the other robber inside the bank. It seemed that Florian actually probably remained in another car outside, and when Meyer and DeMarco exited the bank and hopped into their car, the cars went off in separate directions, with Florian attempting to draw pursuers after him in a fruitless pursuit. The two robbers dashed from the bank up West Main Street, but the alarm spread quickly and brought police from Waterbury, Bristol, Meriden, Plainville, Southington, and other cities and towns from around the area, all intent on blocking the roads out of Southington. Well, the robbers came to a crossroads at the H.D. Smith factory, where a lane led off to Cheshire, Connecticut, and another towards Waterbury, Connecticut, and a third over to Lake Compounce. The constables stopped the vehicle and studied the roadway for signs and noticed wheel marks that cornered toward the lake. Then they looked down the road and noticed a cloud of dust and assumed it was the fleeing bandits. Well, onward they followed and arrived at Compounce Road. As they came to the corner, a motorcycle policeman named Edgar Norton of the Bristol Police Department, who'd actually commandeered a car due to the road conditions, arrived about the same time. So they got together and quickly compared notes and decided that they would follow that car down Compounce Road. Indeed, they did, until Norton noticed, quote, deep tracks turning into a wagon trail leading into the woods, end quote, which makes it sound like this is the 1800s and we're in the Wild West. So they jumped out of the car and they joined him where they detected some oil on the high grass in the trail. Fresh oil meant that they were hot on the trail. That's when they sighted the bandits' car, a 1922 touring car replete with a piping hot engine. And they left a sign that read, quote, will return later. And allegedly the, quote, ink was scarcely dry, end quote, when the sign was found. That was when the message was spread and a posse formed with everyone armed with some sort of weapon. Pistols, double-barreled shotguns, single-barreled shotguns, rifles, and even, quote, ancient muskets, end quote. All the roads leading out were covered, and parties in automobiles searched each wagon trail while the cordon created by police and the posse tightened. Meanwhile, search party members found where the robbers had divvied up the money. They located paper bands that had been used by the bank to wrap up money. So some were marked 100 in ones, 100 in fives, 120s, that kind of thing. Justin Elliott, who represented the insurance company which issued the policy for the bank, added a reward of 10% of the amount recovered to whoever captured the bandits. Meyer admitted to driving the car that was used to escape, and he ended up identifying DeMarco's suitcase or grip. Well, the New Britain Herald, even more local and more accurate, ran an edition the same day under the title, 3 Bagged for Bank Robbery. Police get Plantsville bandits and recover part of $4,400 loot. They subtitled it 2 from Cicero, Illinois, and 1 from Southington quickly rounded up. A second subtitle was Cashiers and Others Positively Identify Men and Accomplice Who Tried to Aid Their Escape. Police were under the impression that the remainder of the loot was hidden somewhere near Grannis Pond. Well, Meyer and DeMarco were then taken by police to the woods on Grannis Farm, where DeMarco located the grip he'd buried, which contained an automatic pistol and $17 in cash. And indeed, another suitcase was found, this one containing 17 silver dollars and some clothing. And nearby on the ground was a revolver. And one of the missing license plates or markers was found as well. And that was all found in the same area. A white shirt and necktie, each monogrammed with the initials TDM, was found by Ralph Thompson in the woods at Grannis Lake. Other articles of clothing were found in the bag and had the same monogram, TDM. Sounds like Thomas D. Marco changed quickly out of the shirt and tie after they divvied up the money and split up. The police planned to take all 3 prisoners to Hartford to have them photographed and measured, have fingerprints taken, and so forth, and to be held in the Hartford jail. The Herald found time to editorialize a little bit, referring to the, quote, pair of nitwits, end quote, who stuck up the Plantsville National Bank. And they noted that had the, quote, 2 foolish men paused to consider all the possibilities before they adopted their nefarious method of obtaining money, end quote, they may have reconsidered. The next day's Herald ran hold-up men's loot sought in woods, police trying to find money taken from bank, trio under $50,000 bonds, DeMarco, Mayor, and Florian defiant in Southington court, addresses given in Cicero, Illinois found to be fictitious. Now here's where they're starting to allude to Cicero, Chicago gangland connections. DeMarco openly boasted that his, quote, boss, end quote, would have the best lawyer in Illinois defend him, and intimated that it would be Thomas Nash out of Chicago. And a note that police were searching for a fourth man. Now they were certain of it and claimed to have an address for him. Meanwhile, inquiries were sent to Cicero, Illinois Police Department about DeMarco and Mayer, and strangely, police said that neither man had a known record in Chicago or Cicero, at least under the names of DeMarco and Mayer. So were they flexing Cicero, Illinois, and a boss? The New Britain Herald kept at it with a title, Name Fourth Man in Bank Holdup. And they subtitled it, Plantsville Bandits Disclose Information Under Police Grilling. We see that constant grilling and playing the robbers against each other was catching the robbers in lies or slip-ups, or, quote, the alleged bandits have begun to talk, end quote. Well, a fourth man who indeed resided in Chicago had been implicated. So apparently for several days, 3 suspicious characters were under surveillance and had been stopping by the Hotel Mattis in Meriden, Connecticut. And in fact, DeMarco and Mayer had been identified as 2 of a trio who had stayed at the Hotel Mattis. Florian allegedly, quote, broke down, end quote, and spilled the beans. So now it appeared that Mayer remained at the wheel of the actual getaway car. Florian was in the decoy car. And DeMarco and the fourth mystery man are the ones who entered the bank. The trio of DeMarco, Mayer, and the mystery man are the ones who got into the getaway car and went to Grannis Woods, where they got out and divvied the cash and presumably split up and went every man for himself. On June 24th, a search of Florian's home revealed letters from the 3 alleged robbers to Florian. Florian stated that he'd met the men, actually in Chicago, and stated that he, Florian, was simply, quote, a tool in their hands, end quote. So the Herald was reveling in this story. In fact, they went on. Police closing in on fourth bandit, fugitive from Southington scene with roll of money. Well, the fourth mystery man was reportedly seen in the northern part of the state on Saturday. Apparently, he'd stopped at a restaurant and flashed a large roll of bills when paying. His description matched with that which the police already had. And his arrest was anticipated as area and neighboring states' police were on the lookout for him. Well, June 30th, things changed. Admit their guilt as bank stick-ups. DeMarco and Mayer confess part and implicate Florian. Cashier, Olson, and wife describe holdup at hearing in Southington court. State Police Sergeant Linehan forges chain of evidence. A, quote, battery of noted legal talent represented the men in court, end quote. It wasn't Thomas Nash, but Florian was represented by Noble E. Pierce of Bristol, and DeMarco and Mayer were represented by Joseph Lustfield of the law firm of Rankin and Lustfield of Chicago, Illinois, associated with William J. Holian of Spellacy, Berman, and Holian of Hartford, Connecticut. And there were hundreds of spectators. In fact, there were hundreds of spectators who were denied admittance due to space. There was room for Florian's family. Mr. and Mrs. Julian Florian and his younger brother had seats, and apparently the mother silently wept throughout the hearing. Mayer and DeMarco were manacled, Florian just had the handcuffs dangling from his wrists. Olson pointed out DeMarco as the one who held the gun on him. Allegedly, when DeMarco went around the corner of the teller's cage, he said, quote, "Mr. Olson, we've been waiting for you for a long time," end quote. Olson stated that he'd been ordered to open the safe, and apparently he acted too slowly as DeMarco allegedly said, quote, "Hurry up and quit your stalling," end quote. Now, there was a small bag in the safe, and DeMarco asked Olson what was in it, and he was told several $100s of gold. So DeMarco took it, and also some gold coins that were in a small tray in a safe, and whatever bills he saw. Now, as DeMarco backed away, he asked Olson where the bank's guns were and was told, and this fourth mystery man went and snagged them, and then they ordered Olson to lay down on the floor. Then DeMarco and the fourth mystery man departed. This is a slightly more heroic version of this part of the story. This time, Olson rushed after the departing robbers. That's when he met the customer Weiss coming in. Olson saw a car departing, and he raised the alarm throughout the neighborhood. Now, it's important to note that Florian had actually been in the bank around 1 p.m., and that he'd cashed a certified check for $25 from the New Britain Trust Company. When called upon in court, Mrs. Olson also identified DeMarco as the one in charge. Now, a Peter Curtin, who was a gate man and a watchman at the railroad crossing near the bank, testified that he'd heard, quote, "Peter, Peter," end quote, and ran out to see Mr. Olson, who asked that Peter get someone to follow that car. Well, Curtin ran back inside his, what they called a shanty, and blew a railroad whistle to alert everyone. At that point, Curtin allegedly saw Stuart Florian running at him, who said, quote, "What's the matter, Pete?" end quote. Peter Curtin informed Stuart Florian that the bank had just been hit, and he said to Florian to get in his car and follow them. Mayer stated that Florian had lived in Chicago, and that they'd even roomed together. In fact, Mayer and Florian had decided to go into business together selling a no-leak compound for automobile tires. Now, Florian stated that he knew about the robbery from about Sunday, so it happened on Wednesday the 22nd, and that he'd been with the 2 or 3 robbers during the planning and said that the trio had tried to get information from him, but he denied that information, and that he'd been told that if any of the robbers were caught, they would, quote, "give Florian a ride," end quote, meaning, according to Sergeant Linehan, quote, "they would bump him off, kill him," end quote. Questions remain, not only with the inaccuracy of the different reporting, but who was that fourth mystery man? I assume that the trio will be found guilty, so what will happen in terms of sentencing for Florian, Mayer, and DeMarco? Was the missing loot found, or is it still out there? And should I get my metal detector and head out east to Connecticut? Are there indeed Chicago gangland connections? Well, those questions and tons more will be addressed as new information becomes available. Now, we move ahead deep into the sultry summer robbery season of July 1927. For now, I want to thank you for spending your time with Decades of History. Till next time.